Good evening, everybody. My name is Ware Harmon. I'm Town Hall's Executive Director, and on behalf of our organization, as well as the University of Washington Center for an Informed Public, the University of Washington's Communications Leadership Program, and KUOW, it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's conversation on maintaining a healthy democracy and communication in the digital age. As we get underway, I want to acknowledge that we gather tonight on the unceded traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, particularly the Duwamish. We thank them for our continuing use of the natural resources of their ancestral homeland. I'm going to skip is what I'm going to do. I'm going to skip some of my typical town hall boilerplate and try to, this is for me, cutting to the chase, by the way. If it's your first time at a town hall event, welcome. We're glad you're here. You should know that if you use a hearing aid, we have, this room is fully loop enabled, so you can flip a switch on your hearing device, and for better or for worse, you'll hear every single thing I'm saying into this microphone, crystal clear, right in your hearing aid. We also hope you'll stick around afterwards, and talk about what you've heard tonight, either in our lobby bar or all the way downstairs on level 1 in our auto bar, which will be open later tonight after the downstairs program. Finally, I want to welcome any young folks and our young people, youth in our audience tonight. As of September of this year, all town hall produced programs are free to anyone 22 and under, thanks to generous funding from Seattle's Office of Arts and Culture. Really quick, grab a calendar on your way out and keep your eyes open for a few upcoming events, including Anna Wiener with Christy Coulter, diving into discrimination in Silicon Valley, stand-up mathematician Matt Parker on near misses, glitches, and blunders in real-world math, a Humanities Washington Think and Drink, exploring the question, is the internet making us miserable? I think I know the answer. As well as upcoming programs featuring William Barber, Diane Ravitch, David Eagleman, Diane Ream, Sister Helen Prejean, Sean King, Kirk Bloodsworth, and Preet Bharara, just to name a few. For more information, visit townhallseattle.org for our full calendar. With that, here to introduce, I left out an important detail, which is that tonight's panel is moderated by Hanson Hosein, and I'm a fool, and I just left my bio of Hanson backstage. But you should know he's the director of UW's Communications Leadership Program, and has been visionary in helping bring the center to life and bring this program to life here at Town Hall. And I hope now he'll do a better job of actually introducing himself than I was just able to wing at the microphone for you. But here to introduce tonight's panel and to discuss a little bit about KUOW's role in fostering trust and community, please welcome KUOW's General Manager, Karen Mathis.
I don't know what to believe anymore. More and more I hear that phrase or something close to it, when I step out into our community. And as President and General Manager of KUOW, and as someone who's worked in public media and regular media for a long, long time, it still pains me every time I hear that sentiment. But I get it. From the beginning of modern memory, in our society, we've lived pretty much with a set of generally accepted facts. Even if we disagreed about a great many things, observable reality generally wasn't up for debate. But what we are experiencing today has seeds going back to at least the mid-1800s. When you have a moment, please go to the Washington Post online and read Steve Inskeep of NPR's article that links disinformation to the development of Morse code. Very interesting. We're going to hear about technology that's generally a little more modern than that tonight, but in an increasingly intensified manner. When instantaneous information spreads with the fuel of emotion, it now seems that we look at reality and we see different things. We say different things. People in power blatantly lie. Citizens heedlessly repeat and spread unsubstantiated claims that placate their worldview, and facts don't seem to matter anymore. It's no wonder we don't know what to believe. So what do? When our lens on reality becomes so warped that trust is shattered, what do? I suspect that you've come here tonight to try to answer that question and to help find a better path forward. At KUOW, we believe at the very core of our being that a better future begins with an informed public, and that starts with listening. Think about the relationships that matter most in your life, the ones that you cherish and rely on, in good times and in bad. I suspect that those relationships work because they start with listening. Trust isn't a thing, it's a relationship. And we won't earn, restore, or sustain trust in a societal sense without doing what you or I would do in any personal relationship. We have to listen. Because it's when we truly listen and make a conscious choice to lower our shields and open ourselves up to empathy that we are truly human. Tuning out is easy, listening takes work. But the better future that we all believe in won't be possible without it. So how do we move forward? KUOW is proud to work with the University of Washington's Center for an Informed Public to try to solve that riddle. Together, we share a common cause to resist strategic misinformation, promote an informed society, and strengthen democratic discourse, a cause that could not be more urgent as we enter the 2020 elections. Tonight, we are honored to partner with the Center to kick off a year-long conversation on trust and democracy. This partnership makes so much sense when you consider, for example, that just this week, a new NPR poll revealed that the respondents viewed misleading information as the biggest threat, the absolute biggest threat to keeping our elections safe and accurate. In the coming months, KUOW will host a series of live events to tackle this topic and some of the issues raised tonight. You can stay in touch with all of that at events@kuow.org. We hope you will join us then, and we're gratified at your presence now. So lean forward and listen. And it's my great pleasure to bring forward Hanson Hosein of the University of Washington.
Thank you very much, Karen. One of my favorite people in Seattle, as is Ware, despite the fact that he couldn't get my bio straight, but that's okay. Ware and I actually just finished our tenure on the board of directors of KUOW for the last 4 years, so we have a very strong relationship with the organization. And Karen is right. It does begin with listening. In fact, that will be the ethos for this evening as we consider this massive subject and this very pressing issue. As you'll learn tonight, the issue of disinformation, misinformation, and how it hurts trust in our open democratic society is the problem of our times. Ray Dalio, who is the head of Bridgewater Capital, who wrote this bestseller called Principles, just put it out in a kid's book, Principles for Success. And one of his foremost principles is that knowing what is true is essential for making good decisions. So the master's program that I co-lead at the University of Washington is communication leadership. And you can't be a good leader if you don't have facts that we can all agree upon and make those really important decisions. So this is fundamental. And you may have heard today, just today, every year the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists comes out with where their doomsday clock is set. And in the Washington Post today, it said, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists is moving the doomsday clock up to 100 seconds to midnight, a metaphor for the end of the world, in recognition of growing threats from nuclear war, climate change, and disinformation. So they mentioned disinformation very specifically. It's worth mentioning the Wall Street Journal had an op-ed today as well and said that we should basically, it's time to stop the doomsday clock because they didn't think it was particularly relevant. So you can see how we're beginning to sort of divide on even issues such as this. So there is massive interest in this, is great momentum on this subject, and it's the reason why the Center for the Informed Public launched last month at the University of Washington. It's also why, given the nonpartisan gravity of this issue and how it transcends different demographic groups, why the Center for the Informed Public also partnered very quickly with Washington State University when it launched last month to make sure that this is a true statewide initiative. In fact, we have Bruce Pinkleton, who is the Dean of the Murrow School of Communications, here this evening as well. Bruce, I saw you back there. There you are there. So Bruce, thanks very much for joining us. And we're really proud of that partnership. Tonight is actually a very special night, other than the program you'll have up here, is that it marks the beginning of a public journey here in Seattle and hopefully to all points around the state. We don't believe that we can have an informed public unless we inform ourselves with the public, and that's you. And so we hope to be able to do this in Seattle and then move on to Spokane and other places around the state and have these really robust conversations with you on this subject. Martin Barron, who's the head of Washington Post, said this recently about journalism, and I come from a background in journalism. I used to work for NBC News. We should be listeners more than talkers, and he's speaking about the media very specifically. I've led several events here at Town Hall over the years, and similar to KUW, I cherish what this institution does in terms of how it leads trust and engages the public on very important issues. And we intend to engage you, but in a very different way. Normally, if you come to a town hall event, if there is a Q&A, there's usually 2 mics at the front of the stage, and you might hear from 7 or 8 people at the end of the evening. We want to do it differently tonight so that we can actually see if we can prototype a better model around democratic discourse. We want to create a space for trust and respect and community as we go into this. And maybe we'll be able to hear from all of you tonight in the unique approach that we're taking. So it will begin with listening. We have partnered with a Canadian organization called Thought Exchange, which helps leaders crowdsource answers to question in real time, which is their tagline. But I think for our purposes, we want to find common ground on big issues in very little time. It'll be very easy to use. We'll have you use whatever devices you have. We have a number of our students from the University of Washington to help you as well, to be able to solicit your thoughts and questions throughout the evening as we engage in this program. It's also anonymous, and none of your information is kept on servers. We want to make sure that as the techlash continues against big tech, that you feel secure and safe that you're using something that is not going to track you. We also think that as we take this platform and this conversation around the state, it'll be very interesting to see how Seattle reacts to this subject matter and what questions and thoughts we get from you compared to, say, when we take it to Spokane or Pullman. And so you're part of our research even as you help set the agenda for this evening. So tonight we're all here to learn, and by doing so, we could probably set a very public agenda for the newly launched Center for an Informed Public. With that, to start our program, I'd like to call up Jevin West, who is the center's inaugural director. Jevin is the associate professor at the University of Washington's Information School, and he teaches the now world-renowned undergraduate course, Calling Bullshit. And I know this is going to be broadcast in KUW later, so I hope I don't get censored for that, but that's what it's called. His research focuses specifically on misinformation and science. So, Jevin, if you want to come on out and pick up one of those microphones. Awesome. So, Jevin, I have just one very specific question for you. Why the CIP and why this town hall?
Yeah, well, first I want to thank everyone for coming. I know that there's lots of things in the news right now that could keep you at home, and so I really, really appreciate you coming out today. As Hanson said, I think it's one of the most pressing problems of our time. And we were lucky at the University of Washington to receive some seed money from the Knight Foundation to start a center revolving around this topic that I think a lot of us, so many of us, are concerned about. And we talk about this across the country in small communities, big communities, academic communities, tech communities, and what we're finding is that, everyone has this same concern, that it's something we can't just shove under the rug. So we developed this center, and our approach is to mix many disciplines, people from from computational social science, from the legal world, from the policymakers, the educators, the people that engage with the community. And that sort of is we think, possibly our special sauce. But why we're doing this tonight is to try to learn from you. Believe it or not, actually, professors and people who work on campus aren't any smarter. In fact, they're probably not as smart. They need the credentials to feel smart or something. I don't know. But I will say that if there's anything I beg you to do is to engage in this conversation. This is our first one that we're doing. Then we plan to go around Washington. And if it's successful, hopefully other states around the union will consider doing this as well. So I'll just say 2 things about why we're here. We're here to talk with you, to learn from you. That's one reason. But it's also to establish trust. It doesn't matter how many great papers we write or conferences we present at, if we don't have that engagement with the public, and the public, writ large, across the state and across the country, I don't think we can make progress on that. So that's what we're going to do tonight. Please engage with the conversation, and also feel free to engage with us afterwards. If you have ideas, the whole point of this center is to take your ideas and to come talk to us. We're going to have an innovation fund, where if you have a great idea, come to us, Write a little thing. We don't have an infinite money, by the way. There's a little bit of money for these kinds of things. But come to our seminars. We're going to fly people in from around the world to talk about these things. We're going to do projects. We have high school students coming to the university. We have these town halls on the road. So please feel free to engage in any way that you can. And with that, let's turn to the other real experts on the panel.
That's great. Thank you very much, Jevin, for that. So as Jevin said, we really do want to hear from you. So we'd like to kick it off with the first question. But I want to set the stage for it first by giving you a short passage from a recent article in the Atlantic magazine from an article called Before Zuckerberg, Gutenberg. And you heard Karen talk about Morse code being an issue of disinformation over 100 years ago. And it was talking about the printing press. When people can publish whatever they want, they do. The printing press made individual books more uniform and more numerous, but it also put the idea of universal truth up for grabs. Martin Luther's challenge to Catholic orthodoxy was, of course, powered by the printing press. Luther posted his famous 95 Theses in 1517. Within 3 years, his printed works had sold some 300,000 copies. In Renaissance terms, this was the equivalent of cat videos. Unlike monastic scribes animated by the one true way, printers were profit-seeking entrepreneurs. They published whatever could sell. Before long, you could find anything in a printed book: conspiracy theories, magic spells, recipes, satire, erotica. You could find support for any point of view. You could just make something up and set it in type, and people would say, "I read it in a book." Of course, today, the scale and speed is much greater with the internet, but we have some universal challenges that we face around disinformation and misinformation over the years. So we want to go to our first question that we want to put to you. This is, we'll explain to you exactly how this works. It's not very hard, but we want to get a scene-setting question and answer from you in terms of what your fears and concerns are around this subject right now. And this will help inform the conversation we'll have with our 5 experts in the next few minutes. And so, as I mentioned, we're using this platform called Thought Exchange, and you can either just use your camera on your phone just to don't take a picture of it, just let it get that QR code, or you can just go on your browser on any device you've got to tejoin.com and enter that 9-digit code. We have a number of our students around the hall. If you just want to put your hands up, if you need any help just getting on board, and then we just ask you to answer that question. And when you get to answer that, once you've done that, you might have the opportunity to start starring other responses that the audience has given, and we'll be able to see all those responses up here, and that'll help us then engage our experts on the subject. So with that, let's see if we can take a couple minutes for that to happen. My friends from Thought Exchange, is there anything else I should be adding in terms of instruction before we move on? No, I think we're good.
Well, while you're filling that out, also, by the way, a famous writer, Filippo de Strada, talking about the printing press, compared the printing press to a brothel. So if we can go that far, we also have our own sort of similar challenges at this time.
And you'll be able to see each other's thoughts in a few minutes as we start to put those up, and then I'll call up the rest of our experts to come respond to that. Pardon? And please raise your hand if you have any questions. And I think I'll get them.
Yeah. Got so quiet all of a sudden.
And so far, we've got 239 responses. So we're
Holy
getting great
cow,
traction
all
on this
right.
so far.
I think we can go home now. We're done. We can take all these responses and answer for the next 3 months. So what's going to happen is we have Hanson that's going to select...
well, we're going to do some Q&A in a second, but first...
Oh, okay, all right,
so
good.
don't jump the gun, Jevin. We're just waiting for a little bit longer. We're going to show some answers, and then I'm going to come to you and ask you some questions.
Here we go.
We're switching over the screen now to see some of the responses that you've given us so far. This is where technology hijacks democracy. So this actually shows you how people are interacting and what ideas are actually gaining traction as you submit your ideas and other people vote on them as well. We're just going to put some of those top ideas up there so you can see it. And you can see the ones that are concerned at the speed of which false information can propagate in a viral way. I am concerned about facial recognition technology and its impact on public protest, that it's the end of facts, that everyone can find something to back up their assumptions. And what I'd like to do before we actually go to the conversation is that as you see some of these responses, maybe take a couple minutes to speak to the person next to you and see whether you agree with what you're seeing as where we're getting critical mass on this, what surprises you, or what further concerns you, just to get a sense of what your neighbor is thinking about this, and then we'll engage in the conversation in about a couple minutes. And if we can put up as many answers as possible so people can see what's gaining traction. And we do encourage, as we do this a little later, just to make sure that you're voting on other people's as you put stars and vote on ideas from your fellow audience members that resonate with you so that we can see which ones really make it to the top. And we'll give you one more minute. Okay. Good. All right, well, thanks very much for submitting that. We wanted to just get you used to the platform and also give our experts who we're going to introduce to you now a sense of what you're thinking about. We'll also get a chance to do this again in about 15 minutes after you get a baseline understanding of what the challenge is right now from our researchers to actually submit questions and your thoughts, and that's how we will engage for the rest of the conversation this evening. So with that, I would like to begin with a general conversation about this. Over to this microphone. So we're going to start with the first question is what is misinformation? What is disinformation? And with that, we're going to hear from Kate Starbird and Emma Spiro. Kate Starbird is an associate professor in the Department of Human-Centered Design and Engineering. She studies how information communication technologies are used during crisis events such as natural and man-made disasters. And Emma Spiro is an assistant professor at the iSchool, as well Information School, and serves as a co-director of the Social Media Lab and the Data Lab. Her work has focused on understanding information-related behaviors during crisis events and on interpersonal and organizational networks online and offline. So Kate and Emma, if you can just help give us a baseline understanding of what is this challenge, misinformation, disinformation.
Thank you, Hanson. This is a really great place for us to get started. I think as all of us in this room have experienced recently and for a long time now, some information is problematic. Right? It can be potentially misleading. It can be inappropriately attributed. it can be inaccurate, or sort of altogether fabricated. And I think it's really important for us also to be careful with the words that we use, right? Words matter, and we know that along with the words come a lot of assumptions. Assumptions about how that information spreads, assumptions about who spreads it and why, and assumptions about what possible solutions exist, what solutions are possible, but also what's desirable in terms of solutions. So it's really great for us to start out this conversation just with some definitions, sort of the ways in which we use particular terms. So I think, as we have continued discussions about this at the center, we have coalesced around the terms misinformation and disinformation. So we use the term misinformation to talk about false information, but information whose inaccuracy is unintentional. We use the term disinformation to talk about information that purposefully misleads with strategic intent. Okay? So the distinction here is really about intent, and I will note that it's very difficult to determine intent in some cases, right? If you get online and you see an isolated social media post without any context and just the information that you see there, it can be very challenging to think about intent of the poster, intent of the sharer, intent of all those who have interacted with that information. The idea of intent can be difficult, but I think that distinction really matters. Right? That distinction really matters, especially as we learn more about the sort of consequences and the characteristics of the misinformation and disinformation we encounter online. And we're learning more and more about that as we engage in our own work at the University of Washington. So let me kick it over to Kate, and she can talk a little bit more about what we've been doing recently.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, Emma and I have been studying online misinformation since about 2013, probably earlier. We just didn't know it. And then about 2015 or 2016, we realized that what we were looking at was actually a lot of pervasive disinformation. And over the last few years, we've learned more and more about that. And our understanding is still changing. It's still evolving. And I actually give a 50-minute talk about this, and I only got 2 minutes or maybe 3 minutes right now. So it's going to be I can't cover it all. But one of the first things I want to say is that disinformation doesn't spread itself. We spread it. And what I mean by we is all of us. It's not somebody else that does it. It's everyone. I think we have a tendency to think about that it's somebody who's not as smart as I am, or it's somebody younger than me, it's the kids, or maybe it's the grandparents, someone older than me. But actually, we're all vulnerable to disinformation, and we're all targeted. And I bet if we all went through our social media posts over the last 10 years, we could find cases where we spread things that we now know to be untrue. And so another thing we're learning is that we're most vulnerable when we're engaging in, when we're within our political identities or our social identities and engaging in conversations online. So especially when we feel a lot of outrage or anger towards someone else. This is when we become very vulnerable, and it's where we're targeted. When we look at some of the disinformation campaigns, and we've studied in particular the Russian campaign leading up to 2016, we can actually see their agents integrating into political bubbles on both sides of the political discourse in the US and polarized conversations, integrating into those communities and trying to stir up division and also cultivate those audiences for their strategic messaging, because when we're in those political selves, we're very vulnerable. And what we're learning about how and why disinformation works is it actually functions to sort of undermine the common ground that we need to share in order to govern ourselves. If we're so mad at the other side, there's already questions about this up there. If we're so mad at the other side, we can't come together to compromise when we need to govern ourselves. And so disinformation is actually an attack on common ground. The last thing I want to say that we've been learning is disinformation, it isn't always meant to convince you of something. It's often meant to confuse you, to have you not be able to understand where you could go for trusted information. We can see that we're feeling a loss of trust. That is the effect of pervasive disinformation. We begin to lose this sense that we can find the information that we need to make decisions, and then we can back away from the conversation. And a society that doesn't know where it can go for trusted information is a society that is easily manipulated and might turn towards authoritarian leadership. And we're seeing that happen in several places around the world right now. And so as we go through this, and Chris is going to talk next, I just want to encourage you, the solution is not to disengage, it's to learn how to better engage. I don't mean to say you should be scared of social media, you're going to spread disinformation. No, we need to learn how to engage more carefully and think about things, but absolutely, we don't need to disengage right now. We need to be able to come together and talk about things.
Thank you very much, Kate and Emma, for setting the stage and giving us an understanding of what the challenge is. And I think it aligns very much with what we've seen about your concerns and we saw with this first thought exchange. We also saw when you were coming into the hall this evening, you saw photographs being displayed where you were asked to choose which one was real and which one was fake, the other one being generated by artificial intelligence. And that just shows you how challenging this situation is. So to help us understand what we can start to do about it, we'll hear from Jevin, who I've introduced already, and you'll also hear from Chris Coward. Chris, just put up your hand there so we know who you are. So Chris is a senior principal research scientist at the Information School and is a director of the Technology and Social Change Group. His current work examines misinformation and civic discourse, including in the context of how public libraries can respond to changes in the information environment. So Chris and Jevin, help us understand what can we start to do about this problem?
Yeah, so I mean, this game that we had up playing, maybe some of you have played it. If you haven't, you can go to it. It's called Which Face is Real? And my colleague Carl Bergstrom and I, at the beginning of last year, wanted to figure out how we could make this technology or sort of help the public know that it exists. This ability to create photorealistic faces, to create videos where you can put pretty much any words you want in someone's mouth, to create voice mimicking so that you can't tell if you hear something on the radio if it's the real person or not. There have already been heists of money based on this technology. But the idea for technology, as long as we know about it, I'm less afraid. But it's in the transition when the technology is jumping ahead and when we as a public don't know about it. To me, that's scary. So that's part of what we can do about it, is just let the public know. Before Photoshop was available, maybe if you saw a photo, you believed it more than you would now if you saw something and it just looked too bad to be true. At least you can say, that's been Photoshopped. So the idea here is just to make people aware. I'm optimistic that we can get through this deep fake or synthetic media transition that we're going through, and you're going to hear more about it. You're going to hear legislation. Actually, next week, the state legislature here has asked us to come. Ryan is an expert around the sort of legal issues around that, so I'll punt to him there. But there's different things we can do about these challenges of misinformation and disinformation. We can throw laws at it. I'm not an expert in that, and that's Ryan. I'm less convinced that law can keep up with technology. We can throw technology at it to try to develop the next AI to detect fake news, but I'm pretty skeptical of that. I teach classes in machine learning. It's something it's not good at. It can win the game Go and maybe beat our champion of Jeopardy every once in a while, but if you gave him another chance, I think he would win. It's these kinds of things we throw it up, but to me, my efforts and my colleague Carl Bergstrom, who's not here, we really thought the best thing that we can do at a university is do what we've been trained to do for a long time, which is teach our students, the public, ourselves. We teach classes at the university so we can get good at it. We can get better. And we can all get better at creating habits of mind, of identifying misinformation and disinformation online. Because it's hard. We're inundated all the time. And this, it's not that, like Kate said, it's not this is one sort of age group that we have to worry about. It's, we got to go talk to the middle schoolers. No, we have to talk from K1 to K99. And that's something that we want to do in the center, is to teach people, to make them better at identifying BS of all kinds. And I'll just say the area that we focus on a lot in our Calling BS class is around misinformation that's wrapped in data and statistics and algorithms, and to try to teach people not to be afraid of that kind of stuff and to sort of push back on that. So education is one way, but another way to really attack this problem is to engage with the community. And that's something Chris has been doing for a long time and something he's working with the library communities around the state and around the country. Chris.
Thanks, Jevin. So yes, I'm going to spend my couple minutes here talking about what can be done at the local level, in communities, and particularly in physical spaces. I know we're going to be talking a lot about online, but I want to start with the physical and I'll bring it back to the online. And by that I mean the public places, just like town hall, where we can come together, talk about issues, debate, discuss, in an environment where we're in this kind of face-to-face environment. And it turns out that the research shows that being in these face-to-face environments can be very influential in your thinking. It works in a couple different ways. If you're likely to trust someone you go to those people and they can even get you to change your mind about something. It doesn't happen as much on social media, but it does happen in your personal connections. It also happens when you overhear something. When somebody's talking and it's not intended for you, but you overhear it, you're more likely to actually think that this could have some credence. So now we have a scale issue. There's not an exceptional place like town hall in every community across this country, but there is another institution, and that's public libraries, and that's, Jevin had mentioned that. And public libraries, I think, have three assets in particular that I think are going to be very important for tackling this problem. For one, they make up what sociologist Eric Kleinenberg calls the social infrastructure. And the social infrastructure, he argues, is just as important to a country's democracy and vibrancy as its physical infrastructure. The bridges, the transportation, the power grid, all those things. And it's the places where people gather, the parks, the squares, and in particularly the public libraries. And there are 16,000 of them. Contrary to popular perception, they're actually seeing a lot of visitation, over 1 billion visits per year. Millennials are the fastest growing users of libraries, so there's a lot of traffic in and out of libraries, and they're not coming to get information per se, because they all have access to information. They're coming to engage in programs and events, develop all sorts of things, create different things with their other people in their community. So that's the first thing, the social infrastructure. The second thing is they have the digital. Of course, they have all of their computers that people use, and if you go to Seattle Public Library, you see they're always filled. But increasingly, they're becoming more creative, and they'll have programs for people to create podcasts, to create media, to create online campaigns around the environment or something else like that. So it's becoming a much more interactive environment for using their digital assets. And if we're going to tackle misinformation, we have to bring together that online experience. And thirdly, and this kind of goes without saying, they have trained information professionals, aka librarians, who at least professionally have been trained to deal with this. Now, here's the challenge. In our interviews with librarians, they of course know that this is a huge deal, but they feel utterly ill-equipped to deal with it. The training in information literacy, which is where I have done a lot of my research as well, has not kept pace with the technological advances that have been mentioned by Kate and Emma and Jevin. And so as these tactics get more and more sophisticated, the librarians are becoming a little bit less and less able to help their patrons navigate this information environment. So that's where my interest is how can we pull together the physical aspects and face-to-face encountering with the digital in these environments to create programs that will help with creating healthier civic discourse.
Thanks very much, Chris and Jevin. So you heard, in terms of what we should do about it, we're looking at both education and trusted public institutions. As we look at some of your responses, I am concerned about facial recognition technology and its impact on public protest. You're concerned around how it impacts elections and all those other things. So if the things that Jevin and Chris have identified as solutions don't quite hit the bar, then the next question is, what should we do about it from a legislative and policy point of view? And with that, we're going to hear from Ryan Kalo, who is an associate professor in the School of Law at the University of Washington, faculty, and co-director of Tech Policy Lab at the University of Washington School of Law. His industry-leading research focuses on law and emerging technology and robotics. So, Ryan, Jevin said there's a little skittish about legislation. What do we need to do about this from a legal point of view?
Yeah, so thanks for the great question. So as you just heard, I'm a law professor, and I'm trained in law. Right? And so I like to joke that like my role in the center is like I'm here to kind of keep things constitutional. You know what I mean? And so, I can tell you, I'm mostly asked not, what should we do, but more like, Ryan, should we do this? And so I would say that one of the things we can't do is that we can't we cannot call for and promote censorship, particularly prior restraint, where we tell people that they can't speak in a particular context or about a particular subject. That's just taken off the table, I hope, by our free speech tradition. And I also think that we should be very skeptical about government coming in and being the arbiter of what is true, in the sense of, of people, like what meaning should you make of something, or what should your opinion be? Like, maybe we can have a role for institutions to establish common facts, but you don't want the government to be the ministry of truth, okay? That said, there are places where I think law is going to be really useful. And so one thing that you should know is that, the law is going to have a little less to say, maybe a lot less to say, about misinformation, where the idea is that someone is just repeating something that they heard, they don't know it's false. That's not the place where you want to bring, the law in, which after all, the state has a monopoly on the authorized or legitimate use of violence, right? You don't want to bring the state in for people just having misinformation. But disinformation, strategic disinformation, that may be a different story. And I'll tell you, one of the places where First Amendment jurisprudence gives a lot of ground is in the case of fraud. So in situations where you're committing a kind of fraud on the marketplace of ideas, and you have something to gain from it, that's something that the law is comfortable with. The idea being that you're doing misinformation, disinformation to drive down the stock market. You're trying to sell a certain product that doesn't have the amazing health qualities that you claim. This is something that we're pretty used to dealing with, and that the Constitution is not too concerned about. And so we might ask, well, how do we broaden that in a way that's responsible? So for example, maybe if you tell people that they really have to vote on November 9th, that's the sort of thing that you might be really concerned about if you're giving people bad information. Or a lot of the things we see, things like telling people, hey, go to this website and this is how you register to vote on this website. But in fact, you're not actually registering to vote, right? So you're not getting something material like a fraud. It's not like a Ponzi scheme, but you're getting people to do a behavior, and those are things. The other thing I would say is that we're going to need the law here. Because technology is not really up to it. I mean, I have to agree with Jevin in one way, technology is not up to it. But there might be places where the law is. And so one of the examples is, I don't know how many folks in this room know precisely like those like deep fakes that make it look like people are doing something that they're not, or those fake people that are being created by artificial intelligence. I don't know, do people know like how that works? I don't know how people know quite how that works, but a very simplistic way to talk about it is that it's actually two different AI systems, one of which is saying, hey, does this thing I just made look real? And the other one being like, no, it doesn't look real yet. And then it's like, okay, I'm going to make this change, and it's just this idea of adversarial generative networks that speak to each other, where one proffers, hey, this looks real, and the other one plays that game that Jevin has people play, basically, until the one system fools the other system, and then they're like, okay, we agree, it's ready to go, right? So what does that mean? Well, part of what that means is if you come up with techniques that are able to tell real from fake, and then you publish those techniques to everybody, like you say, hey, I found a way to figure out what's fake. Well, in theory, the people that are making those fakes can then incorporate that technology into this dynamic, right? And so it's like a cat and mouse game, but the cat is made of mice, right? So if that's the technological context, you're going to need to get at people's motivations. You're going to need to get people's behaviors. You're going to need to use things like the law that really are aimed ultimately at humans and what we find to be permissible. So we don't purport to have all the answers, really any answers yet, but these are kinds of the things we're thinking about at the center.
Great. Thank you very much, Ryan. So provocative problem and provocative solutions you've heard so far. What we're going to do now is actually we're going to get the questions and thoughts from you that we will then engage the panel with for the rest of the evening. So with that, before we start that, I'm going to ask Leah from Thought Exchange just to come up to tell you how this is going to work. And then we're going to take a couple minutes to get all your questions, and we'll also get you to vote on them so that we can get the top questions at the top of the list, and we'll engage them respectively on those answers. So just hold on for a minute, and here's Leah from Thought Exchange.
Thanks. All right, you've done it once. We're going to do it again. We're going to get those codes back up for you. We're going to try and give you an extra few minutes. The rating part's the key. We want to make sure that our speakers are going to answer the questions that are really most important to you. Again, if you need a hand getting in, give a wave. And I'll stop talking for a minute. This is the hard part for us up on the stage, is to stop talking.
That's right, listen.
Yeah. Can we get the code back up for a minute? We switched a little too fast.
We're going to take a couple more minutes. We're getting some great responses, and I have a really good list of questions so far.
People didn't know they were going to have to work so hard when they came tonight. You can't just sit passively and listen to people talk. That's... We're going to at some point, yeah. In our school, in our class, we really heavily engage our students. Yeah, you guys are actually guinea pigs, to be honest. We shouldn't be admitting this, but you really are kind of the first ones we're trying this at. You know, so tell us where we can do better. And we do some version in our class. So the classes I teach have 160 students, and so you only really talk to them and don't really get this bi-directional conversation going. So we've tried other software, not exactly like this. I think Thought Exchange is a little more advanced. But let us know if this is working. We want to make sure that we do well in our next ones. We'll take one more minute, and then we'll start asking questions of our panel.
So once you've shared your thought, click next through to star, and then you're going to start to see the thoughts of people around you and your own thought, and you can rate those based on how much you would also like to hear the answer to that question. And for those that are in and are into the star step, see if you can rate 30 thoughts.
What's super funny to me about this is the fact that, like, when I look out at my students and I see them all looking at their phones, you know what I mean? And I'm like, why aren't you participating? But now I look at those of you who are not looking at your phones. You're not participating. It's really weird.
And we acknowledge that this is a very meta situation, because the whole point to the Center for the Informed Public and the funding that it received was to look at the impact of technology on democracy. And so we're trying to use technology to see if we can actually engage in a more democratic conversation and to see if we can get to the bottom of what is actually a pretty explosive subject in itself.
Yeah, and I'll just say we've all talked to the public. I've talked in small towns, big towns, and in city halls, sometimes it's the person with the strongest hand and the loudest voice. And so that was the idea behind using this thought exchange, is that just those with the loudest voice don't get to own the microphone. But with
All right.
those are the best questions.
For those that also have been looking up here, this is just a visual representation of what's happening in the room. Those little people, that's you guys. There's thoughts being shared. Those orange lines are all the stars and ratings that are happening. So even though many are on their phone working away quietly by themselves, we're actually making amazing connections throughout the room. All right, with that, I'm going to close it. I'll get Kyle to move over to top thoughts. Refresh it once, and then we'll be good.
All right, here we go. So, and again, this is, if I have two watchwords for this evening, it's about agency and accountability. We want to give you agency to set the conversation, and we want to be accountable, so we want to show what some of those leading questions are as we engage. And so, with that, I might as well go for the most highly ranked question, which is, I'm a high school teacher. What are the 2 or 3 most important things I should be teaching my students on this? And I don't, maybe, Jevin, since you've been trying to figure this out from an education point of view, what can we do at that level?
Definitely, and I actually want to take this opportunity to identify actually someone in this room that drove from Vancouver, Washington. He's one of the actual world experts on media literacy. Mike, I know you're going to try to hide, but where are you? Raise your hand. All right, he's right out there. So Mike and Bruce, who's sitting right, have done a ton of work on media literacy. Let's just give him a hand of a raise of gun. Drove all the way here. Now, really, Mike, actually, why don't you stand up, yell real loud, and tell us what the 2 best things high school. No, he's giving me the cut. Okay, all right. Talk to Mike afterwards, but I'll say this. So we are engaging with high schoolers right now. So Liz Krause is in here too. She's running our Misinfo Day program. Liz, I know you're here there somewhere. What we're trying to do is learn good answers to that. And to do that, we have to bring high school students to the university, and we spend an entire day talking about misinformation, disinformation. We're going to bring 500 students from urban and rural areas, but we're not the only university. Washington State's going to do it, several other universities around the country. Hopefully it'll become a national thing. But in our discussions and planning, there's a couple things that we want to teach students about. First of all, it's to teach them about biases, confirmation bias, something many of you have heard. Just understanding that we have these biases, that we remember, we sort of look for and get these endorphin rushes for the things that fit our narrative of the world. So just understanding a little bit about what confirmation bias is, I think, is important. It's not an easy concept to teach to students, but it gets them to reflect on their own thinking and their positioning in the world. The other thing is I like to teach students a lot about how the information ecosystem works and the economics of this system works. By understanding that the platforms are there with one objective. That objective is to stick you to the platform. They don't care, the platforms don't care what you're reading. They don't care whether it's misinformation, true information, disinformation. They want to keep you on the platform. And by understanding that, I think the students begin to see the kinds of things that are pulling them in, from clickbait, of course, to headlines that are constantly being manipulated. They then start to understand why these platforms are doing constant A/B experiments every day. The platforms know more about human psychology than any human psychologist in the world. They start to understand why there are factories in Macedonia creating every day fake news. Why? Because it makes them money. They start to understand a little bit more the kinds of tricks that pull them in, and they start talking about it. So just understanding how the system works and understanding the kinds of biases that the system is trying to hook them on are 2 things that I'd love to teach them.
Emma, you wanted to say something?
Let me just jump in and highlight 2 things that Kate said, right? The other thing that we've realized is we are all vulnerable, and this is a participatory phenomenon, right? It relies on us. And so as Jevin said, some of the work that Mike has done, right? Being able to train our students just in these to get into the routine habit of checking things before sharing things rather than just sharing things and then checking things. I think that's one of the things that we can do.
Here's a legitimate question that I know that, Kate, did you want to say something about that before we move? That we're going to get definitely when we take this in other cities as well, and I think it's probably worth answering now. Do those doing the work of the Center represent a diversity of political orientation? If you are all progressives, how do you persuade conservatives to heed your research? And we have to say that the mandate of the Center is very much a nonpartisan one. So how do we address that? Does anybody want to take that hot potato one?
That's a hot potato one.
Oh, all right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a critically important question. I think that You can never be totally objective, but hopefully you can be impartial. And I think that one of the things that the research that I'm aware of that we're doing and have done in the past shows is that, while there may be certain kinds of phenomenon that are more prevalent in particular communities than others, there is disinformation, misinformation throughout the political ecosystem. Somebody asked a fair question. What if you guys are a bunch of progressives, whatever happens to be? I don't know. I mean, we're trying, right? So, for example, I am on the board of the R Street Institute, which is a conservative think tank in Washington, D.C. It's also a recipient of Knight Foundation funding, and we're in regular dialogue about these set of issues. They recently sent me trying to think of how I can do this for KUOW. They recently sent me the mug that they have at R Street, and it's great. It just says F is my freedom is my second favorite F word, is what the thing is they sent to me. In other words, they're a very pro-liberty, pro-market organization, and they're one of the places that I go personally for gut checks and for other perspectives. I don't know what other people's strategies are, but that's my own.
Yeah, I think this question is really important, and it's something that we think about a lot. And I think we're really careful in the work we do to actually put in our papers what the positionality of our researchers are, so people can understand that we're looking at this through these perspectives. But when we think about the work that we're doing, we don't think this is about the U.S. right versus the U.S. left or the liberals versus conservatives. We really think our goal is to strengthen democratic discourse and to make sure that people have a voice, that their voice isn't overwhelmed by other people that are trying to manipulate the spaces to drown it out, that people have equal voices in society, and that we're able to come together and trust each other and trust the information that we're seeing. And we don't think that's a partisan mission. That's a mission about something that I would hope we all care about, and that our values are all shared across all of us here, no matter what our current political orientation is that we really care about democracy in the U.S. and democracy in other parts of the world, but really democracy in the U.S. and how to keep that strong.
Kate, I want to stay with you a little bit longer just because the next question is, what's the number one thing we can do to inoculate ourselves against misinformation and disinformation? You, and I think Emma, have spent a lot of time in online communities trying to figure this out, especially with bots and other agents trying to get involved there.
Yeah, well, I can tell you we've done a lot of qualitative in the data research looking at this content, and the first thing I can say is it works. It's extremely disorienting, it plays at our biases, and it's very effective. I don't know if there's a simple inoculation. I've sent research teams and I've gone down myself knowing that we were looking at disinformation and still being affected by it. I think we have to be careful about what we expose ourselves to. I think one of the things we tell people is that disinformation doesn't get us here. It's not usually, it manipulates some of our critical thinking skills in ways that we're just learning about. But where it really draws us in is here. It goes through our emotions. It gets us through the gut, and it gets us to feel outrage or anger at somebody else, or it plays off, something that's making us mad or sad or fearful. And so what we tell people to do is to tune in to when information is affecting us there, and to maybe step back and say, now why does someone want me to feel so mad right now? Before we reshare something or before we let that settle into how we see the world.
And I'll just add one thing about that question. So I really appreciate that question. It's so important to us in the center about not just representing one sort of slice of the ideological spectrum or the political spectrum. I'll just say, personally, I come from a town of 3,000 people in Idaho, and then now I live in Seattle, and they're very different worlds. And I think I try to bring that kind of that perspective into the kinds of things that I'm doing around these issues. And one thing that we're really trying to do as a center is to partner with Washington State, who has a much better access to the rural communities of Washington, and to go listen. And so when we go on the road for this town hall on the road, it is very much directed as a response to that question. It's to try to learn from the rural communities about what their perspectives are, what their values are, and what their beliefs, because you can't talk about information unless you engage those issues.
There's a lot of, oh, sorry.
Can I piggyback on this?
Sure.
I've been waiting for this, and I need to take this opportunity. We also can't forget about other communities, urban communities. I'm actually a product of Lakes High School down in Tacoma. My dad was in the Army, and I care a lot about the military communities. I think we have to think about the diversity diversity of different communities. And also, I think we need to keep reminding people of our stories. Like, we're from here, or we're from places that, you know, and we're, you know, we know you, you know us. And I think that's a really important part about building trust and building trust between us, not just building trust in us. We want to build trust between the people that we speak to and our communities.
There's a lot of concern in your questions and what we're hearing about the role of journalism and how do you find trusted media sources. Chris, you talked about how librarians have been the front line of this in a trusted institution, but also don't feel like they've got the right amount of tools. So how do we come up with a trusted set of media sources that we can move forward to be able to make smart decisions as democratic citizens?
These are all tough questions because journalism has been struggling with this. And we're very fortunate in Seattle to have KUOW, the Seattle Times, a local newspaper, one of the few remaining local newspapers in the country. And they've done a lot of really innovative programming to try to create that trust and try to create conversations around the issues that matter to our community. In the work that I'm doing with libraries, I'm actually involving the media as well as we try to come up with solutions. And to piggyback on the earlier question, we're focusing first on some of these really rural communities first, but bringing in local journalism, community journalism, and working with librarians and local community organizations to try to come up with programs where we can have these more intimate conversations around the issues that matter in each of those communities. And I think the key is to make sure that that the issues are reflective of those communities and of their priorities. And that's where I think we can start to build trust rather than on these kind of larger issues that are becoming so polarized.
I mean, trust in journalism continues to plummet in this country especially as the election approaches. Does journalism still have a role in making sure that we remain a trusted, democratic, open society when it comes to information, misinformation? What do we need to do about journalism? Does anybody have a response to that?
Well, I'll just say this. It's so interesting because we were talking to a potential postdoctoral candidate that would be joining us later next year, and she said she had this really great way of thinking about what would be a good value, what would be a good trust value for journalism, because in some ways, you want some distrust. We teach students and the public to be critical of what they're reading. Well, they're critical right now of what they're reading in the media. But I think, I do think that there is this erosion of trust. There is this, as you look at a lot of these Pew surveys around sort of this hyper-partisan split that's just getting wider and wider and wider. It is of concern, and I hope someone comes up with a fantastic business model in journalism that one is profitable, or at least sustainable, so they can stay around, and that sort of is a many sides kind of a solution to this, that sort of reports less talking heads and more about what actually happened that day.
I think strong journalism is going to be critical for our democracy to survive. Journalism is suffering across a lot of different dimensions. Its financial and economic models have been disrupted. Journalists are having to adapt to new conditions of information production that have actually kind of lowered the quality and in some cases opened them up for even more criticism. And I think it's very important that we are critical of journalism, but in a way that helps to make journalism stronger, not in a way that just says, hey, let's dash this on the floor and we'll just get all of our information online from whoever we see there. And I think it's really important that we have a strong journalistic profession in the US. And one of the ways to start with that is to support local journalism. We know that local journalism still has trust, local outlets still have trust, but we have to kind of foster that trust. We have to make sure that they have the resources they need to do a good job, that they're not just sending people onto the social media to look at what's going on, that they can actually send people to the places that they need to go report. So we need to support local journalism, and we need to think about ways to be critical in ways to build journalism up, not to tear it down, because if journalism gets teared down, if we don't have a place where we can go for trusted information, we're in trouble.
And that's one reason why the CIP is partnering formally with KUOW Crosscut, and we've had conversations with the Seattle Times as well. Here's a question for you, Ryan, and I think it's one that people really are concerned about. How does the law address the issue of a technology platform not being responsible for the content on the platform? They seem to have gotten a real a buy from that. They're not liable for the stuff that appears on Facebook or on YouTube.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of people in my community, like the tech policy community, like the way to get their blood pressure up is to start talking about platform liability. You know what I mean? People have really, really strong views, one side or the other of this. And I want to draw a distinction in your mind between using the law to incentivize better behavior and better business models by a Facebook or a Google, which is something we can do, versus holding Facebook or Google responsible for the content on their platform, which is largely something that at present we cannot do. So imagine, for example, that we're really worried about journalism in part because of the way in which these platforms like Google and Facebook have the ability to just basically co-opt the content from journalists and not really compensate them for it. So people will go to Google for their news instead of just CNN, for example. Or imagine you're thinking about the problematic ways in which misinformation is fueled by an ad economy that allows you to sort of pull ads from anywhere, and that's how you make your money with your misinformation or disinformation campaign. Those are really all business models and activities. Money's involved. And to personify the law, which my students always sort of laugh at me, like the law is like this person, have you met the law? This is what the law does. But to personify the law for just a moment, to anthropomorphize it, the law is pretty comfortable getting at that kind of thing, at business models, are you dealing in a way that's fair, or are you engaged in unfair trade practices? But another thing that is true of U.S. law today is that there is a very, very strong immunity for the Facebooks of the world for what users put on there. You just can't attribute it to Facebook. If you see all kinds of rampant misinformation, if you see Russian disinformation, whatever it is, they may be trying to clean it up. They may do a good job. They may do a bad job. What you can't do is you cannot attribute that stuff to them, right? And the people that really get nervous about presidential candidates, for example, saying, hey, we should change this law and we should hold Facebook or Google or Microsoft accountable for the things that happen on those platforms, that's a real dangerous road, and we should be super careful about that.
So how do we, if we can't deal with that from a legislative point of view, what can those companies do to actually make sure they're not overrun with disinformation?
Yeah, I mean, so a simple example is, maybe we shouldn't be telling, Facebook that they have to verify the truth of political ads, or that they have to carry political ads, or that they can't carry political ads. All these things that are sort of, or they're going to get in trouble if they have a certain kind of political ad. Maybe we ought not do that. Maybe we should, but maybe we ought not do that, right? But one of the things we could do is say, look, if you're going to have political ads on your platforms, you need to keep all of them in a database. All the ads that you have, where they come from, who's seen them. Because one of the really pernicious things that's going on, incidentally, is the way that people are being manipulated based on what the platform knows about the individual, right? And so the idea would be that you'd have some kind of political campaign, and for each individual person, you would say a message, that message is tailored to that particular person. And if they saw the message that their neighbor saw, or another county over saw in support of the same candidate, they would say, whoa, 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 I don't want anything to do with this, right? So if they see the conservative candidate talking about how this county should be dry, gosh, that's going to really turn them off about this particular voter, And so there's a real accountability gap, because the platforms are sitting on all this information about who's buying ads on their platform, right? What are those ads saying? Who's seeing them? All these kinds of things. Forcing the companies to keep logs of that and to disclose it to us, again, that doesn't treat the company like the publisher. nor does it censor them. And so we need to make moves that foster accountability without censoring, and not necessarily with attributing the content to the platform itself. I know it's a little technical, but that's my answer.
So Ryan, so can I just ask Ryan real quick, because we have these discussions in the center, you're seeing it real time. So how are the rules that govern political ads on radio and television and these other media types, first of all, there are differences, of course. Why hasn't the platform or rules around them caught up to at least closer to the kinds of rules that are happening and have for a long time around radio and TV?
Yeah, that's a really fair question. So, historically, United States law has been pretty reticent to weigh in political conversations for the obvious reason that you do not want a situation like what I described of censorship or promoting one message over another or one candidate over another, right? But there have been rules in place. And one of the interesting things about the broadcast medium space and then ultimately cable is that the Supreme Court has allowed a freer hand by government in restricting messages when they occur in a broadcast format based on the idea that, hey, the broadcasters are using this common medium that we all share, which are the airwaves. The idea being like, the airwaves are ours, and if you're going to use them, you need to obey these certain rules. It's not like going to a public square where you're just talking to people. You're using this thing that's a shared resource that we're letting you use called the airwaves. Similarly with cable television, many of the same rules moved over to cable, again, on the conceit that if you're going to lay this cable, you're going to have to lay it over public thoroughfares. You have to do something. And so that has historically meant that there's been stronger sort of hand by the government. And a lot of those rules have not translated over into the internet space, and perhaps it's a good idea. But I will say that that's no panacea, Jevin, because those rules themselves are eroding over time, and the protections that the kinds of rules we had 50 years ago, 40 years ago, would not fly today and would be unrecognizable today.
And Kate, I'm going to get you to think about a question as I come to one for Chris and Jevin in a second, but there was some thoughts about what to do about trolls and how do you manage them in online communities. But Jevin and Chris, in the meantime, since we're talking a bit about elections, somebody asked, this sounds like the long game, but we know these techniques are already being used to sway the outcome in 2020. What can be done now? Is that an education or a public institution?
No, I'm happy to. I mean, it's a really good question. I mean, it's interesting to watch the difference, the different kinds of approaches happening in different countries around this issue, where we're sort of going through this transition, sort of the disinformation transition. At different states, even in the union, the way they're treating their voting. I mean, one of the things that we should do, I guess, is, the easy sort of answer is to have discussions about it and make people aware of the kinds of things, the ways in which they can be manipulated, at least, so that at least if there was, any levers on the law side or technology could contribute, maybe we could, throw some of those things. But to be perfectly honest, I'm not so sure. On the time frame that we have right now, we're into the months, maybe. Even the Iowa caucus right now it's on its way, and they're trying new technology in Iowa. To me, we're running some pretty interesting experiments. Let's put it that way right now.
Is there room for trusted institutions to do something about this, Chris?
Well, I was going to just, I'm with Jevin on this. I don't know what we can do in the short term around the elections. And there's even another issue that's even sooner than that I'm very concerned about, and that's the census. And that's going to we've already seen signs of disinformation campaigns. The librarian I was talking to the other day said a person came in with a mailer that she had received to go ahead and register for the census ahead of time. Well, it turned out that mailer was false, and that it was just trying to capture her personal information, probably for some later disinformation campaign or some other source or other reason. Now, librarians the librarians I talk with, there's like, how can we at least give them more, kind of almost not quite real time, but at least as quickly as we can, just information on what types of campaigns, disinformation campaigns, tactics are being deployed, so that this will be the first digital online census, right, that we've ever had. It'll be the first time that people could go to a computer and fill it out for themselves. so you don't have to wait for the enumerator to come to your home. So that, for that reason, the public libraries, these public spaces which get huge amounts of visitation, particularly for those hard to reach and the populations that are going to be undercounted, that we're all fearful are going to be undercounted, the libraries are going to play a critical role in being able to reach out to them and help them navigate, because they're going to be the targets of this disinformation campaign. So I'm worried about the census already, and then like a month later, the campaign, the elections.
And then let me just jump in and add one thing here is that, we're not the only ones working on this problem. And so, especially around the census and the election, we have some fabulous colleagues who that is, they're political scientists or they've been embedded at the census for, months. And so we are one of 5 centers around the country who are working in this space and around these problems. So, there's more problems than we can answer here with all of us in this room, but these problems are recognized and are being worked on by some really great people.
Well, as Emma spoke to that question, then Kate, perhaps you can give us some good advice about how to deal with trolls when we're online in some of these communities.
Don't feed the trolls.
We have one here in Seattle.
I mean, it depends on what kind of trolls you meet. There are trolls that are there just to kind of get a rise out of you and try to make you upset and get attention for themselves and those kinds of things. And then we're also using that term trolls. I think we're misusing it a little bit to talk about actually agents of disinformation that are paid to do that same kind of activity and try to shape audiences. And I think there's slightly different things that you might want to do, but I don't know. All I have is like the way that I've kind of tried to interact around these things as an individual with trolls, and that is, I try to give someone the benefit of the doubt at first in an interaction, and then if I realize that that's what they're trying to do, I just disengage. And they can yell at me all they want, and they're just not going to get anything back from me. And I think that's the way to kind of silence them, is to just not give them the attention that they want. For the other problem of like paid agents that are manipulating conversation, this is a complex problem. They're getting better at what they do. It is harder and harder to differentiate them from real people who are trolls, because they act like each other. Like, people act like bots and bots act like people, and so it is really difficult. And if you're not sure where someone comes from, I mean, there are some techniques you can use online to kind of try to see where where an account comes from, how long it's been there. You could use this thing called the botometer to kind of get a sense on whether it's been part of information operations. But if you're not sure, just disengage. You can mute them, you can block them. Just disengage with that particular person, and don't call them a Russian agent, because it's probably not what they are. Just choose to spend your time and your life energy somewhere else.
Yeah, and I'll add one thing, related to trolls, like Kate was saying, were these bots. And one of the things that was really illuminating last year when Facebook was shoved in front of Congress and had to talk to them, and that's going to continue to happen. I think it's likely a good thing. They had to admit that they, in a 6-month period, had deleted 1.3 billion fake accounts. And they advertised 2.27 billion users, and that sounds good to shareholders, but when you're deleting 1.3 billion, that's a pretty substantial number of fake accounts. And so there's with not much training, you can create bot farms, and you can really influence certain issues if you sort of deploy these kinds of bot armies, and it's something we need to be talking about. And actually, Ryan has written about whether bots need to disclose whether they're bots.
Before we go there, make sure we know that bots and trolls aren't the same thing.
Yes,
bots are automated, and trolls are
dangerous.
human operated. So there's different kinds of things, and they often work together in influence campaigns.
Well, believe it or not, we've had a robust conversation. We're actually at the end of this particular section of this event. Maybe you can give us one thing that people can do right now around misinformation and disinformation that would be most helpful in terms of taking action on this. Do you want me to start? You to start? Yeah.
Okay, I think one thing that people can do, in addition to coming to these kinds of things, is sort of think more a little bit and share a little bit less. So pause a little bit. So I said think more, share less, I think would probably be the one thing I would say do. Instead of, my colleague Carl, he says this great metaphor where he says, if I found a piece of candy out in Capitol Hill on the sidewalk, I wouldn't pick it up and share it with someone, especially if it was unwrapped or whatever. I wouldn't do that. And yet we do that online all the time. It's like, oh, I kind of hear some, I don't know. Well, let's just post it. Let's share it. let's see. So let's just pause a little bit and don't share that candy that you find online a little bit as much.
Thank you for that, Jeff. I didn't get a chance to put the caveat in and say, in one line, can you tell us what people should do?
Oh, you didn't tell me that.
So I'm going to ask the rest of your colleagues,
You got a
in
harder
one line, what could
task.
people do around this particular challenge? Anybody want to take the next one?
I mean, I think we started off this evening saying that we're here to listen. So I think, listen and have conversations with the people who are surrounding you.
I was going to say the exact same thing. Like, talk to people. If you've cut someone off or like, oh, I can't say anything, call them, talk to them, have conversations with them, ask them about their day, listen to them, have empathy for them, and let's build connection rather than tearing ourselves apart.
Well, they took my bell, say another one. Just learn what these technologies are doing. Learn about how they work, because I think just being able to talk about the facilities of these technologies to do this thing is really, can start having conversations that could then come back and help maybe. It's just off the cuff, but yeah, I think I've been, since I came into this was one line, wasn't it? Sorry. But no, since I came into this, I've just been fascinated to learn from my colleagues and others, literally what the technology is capable of doing. And that's what it's blowing me away. And just having conversations about that with other people is, for me, creating bridges with people from different perspectives.
I again, law professor here, right? But I mean, I think that what's critically important right now is a bit of imagination. Maybe it sounds like a strange thing to say in a context where we're worried about misinformation and of all kinds. But imagine the world that you want to live in, and I think there's a real propensity, especially when it comes to technology, to say to ourselves, well, this is just how it is. This is how the platform works. This is how this happens. This is how we interact with each other, right? But, we're people, and we get to decide what our world looks like, and we get to make decisions about how these platforms look and what they do, right? So just imagine a world, where you feel safer and you feel that there's more trust. And so don't stop, imagining that. It sounds like a don't stop believing.
This is where Tony Soprano gets it. The intent was to hear from these wonderful researchers and really get a sense of the work and the journey they're about to embark upon. It's a really crucial one, as you can hear, and it's being done across the country, not just here in Washington State. There are 4 other centers being funded by the Knight Foundation. And we were going to come back to you with the last question on Thought Exchange, which is, what action would you want to take around disinformation and misinformation? Instead, I asked them to sort of share that, to give us more insight on it. And I think if you feel like doing this one more time, perhaps you could help us set the agenda for the kind of work you would like to see the Center for the Informed Public do as it continues. It's new. It's trying to figure out what is most urgent right now. Obviously, the election is a concern. Artificial intelligence and facial recognition is a concern. If you'd like to take a couple of minutes and just, I know we have a different question up here, but maybe on Thought Exchange, respond to what action would you like the Center for the Informed Public to take as it starts its work around this very urgent issue. And then we'll see that up on the screen quickly, and either they'll take it away with them as part of their mandate as they're thinking about what happens next. We'll compare it to what the other town halls are saying across the state. And if we have time tonight, just before we leave, just get a quick reaction from them as well, if there's something there that they haven't thought about. So if that's okay with my colleagues from Thought Exchange in the back, should we just get one more vote on what mandate or what would you like the Center for the Informed Public to do around the challenges you've heard this evening? So if we can put that up and we'll take a couple minutes quickly to do that. And if you guys want to respond
I
to that.
love that. I love that question. And by the way, if you don't want to put it in Thought Exchange, email us, because these are the kinds of things this was the whole point of coming out into the public. We don't have to do. We don't get paid extra in our salary to come out here. So please reach out to us and help us figure out what we should be thinking about, for sure.
Because Center for an Informed Public has to engage with the public on this. So we're going to show the results in a few seconds. And as Jevin said, please do engage with them. In the meantime, Jevin, Emma, Kate, Chris, and Ryan, thank you very much for your really important work and for sharing this really important insights with us today. It's obviously extremely pressing. Thanks very much for joining us. Let's stay up here. Please stick around if you can, just to see what the end of the results are and hear some responses from our experts.
Just because I saw why people were filling this out, I saw a lot of comments around facial recognition.
Yeah.
Just so you know, the port here in Seattle that includes SeaTac and many of the other places of entry for the state are right now seriously considering whether they're going to use facial recognition in our airports and in our ports, and when you come off, the next cruise that lands in our port. And right now, they're taking comments about this. So if this is something you're concerned with, because I keep seeing it pop up there, make sure that you're a part of that conversation. It's happening right now. It's involving industry. It's involving the port. It's involving tech leaders, et cetera. And so it's a really important discussion. If you feel strongly about it, get involved in that conversation right now.
Great. Can we show some of the results from this last question yet on the screen? So it was the question is really, what do you want the center to focus on, or what kind of action would you like to see? I've gotten some responses to what you want the center to focus on. The number one was support local journalism like KUOW.
Yeah, definitely.
To listen more to others who have different perspectives. Bring us real-world examples and practical things we should be doing. I think that was definitely something that was common through a lot of the questions that we saw today. I think people really want to know what tools they can apply now. Were you going to say something to that,
Mike
Kate?
Caulfield has some great stuff. I think it's SIFT, is that right? SIFT, you can look that up. It actually has things that you can do to better sort of vet the things that you're seeing online.
And also, the Calling BS course that my colleague and I put out, we put out these things for free. There are videos, there are vignettes, there's case studies about specific things, mostly around BS that comes in data, so things to look out for there. But we provide all sorts of other things. So that's all free, and many other sources, like Mike's resources as well.
I see here extensive, easy to understand publicity sorry, I just missed that because it moved, but basically people really want to understand what the problem is and then understand what the solutions are. Can we just go up to the number one rank just to see what the first one is so far? We're just, there we go. Teach critical thinking with the use of technology.
Totally
Provide
agree.
training on the latest technologies and tactica being used to spread the disinformation. Continue to share methods. Critical thinking is obviously the media literacy. Fight, lobby, argue for transparency rules for social media. Talk to marginalized communities. This is what Kate was saying in terms of how we engage communities around this. Set up workshops to train the public and empower them to combat these issues. Is that something that we can do through the Center for the Informed Public? Chris, you're nodding very
definitely.
vociferously.
And then, again, through our partnerships with libraries and other community-based organizations.
Yeah, no, I
And
think
schools
one of the
and
real there's 4 pillars in our center. One of them is research. Of course, we're a research at our core, but we also have community engagement, policy, and education. Education is a big part, so I'm seeing that theme come out, is to make sure that we're reaching out to the public. I'm glad that we're seeing this.
Okay.
Another point about reaching out to marginalized communities, which is critically important to us and something that we're very consciously doing, is the evidence that marginalized populations wind up being more targeted for misinformation, and issues like race and gender are absolutely deployed regularly, in order to foment strife in the United States, right? So paying close attention to indigenous issues, issues of race, issues of gender.
Yeah, and one thing I would say for all these questions out there, if you put this question up and it got upvoted, congratulations, you had a great question. Now you have to come talk to us and help us run the program. We'll even give you maybe some funds to help us do that. But if it's workshops, come talk to us about, I know there's some great high school teachers in here, come to us and we can figure out how to give you resources or a platform to go about doing this, and you can teach us how to do this right.
Great. Well, I'm seeing a lot of great stuff here, and I think this really gives us some clarity in terms of what we want. I think somebody mentioned, Ryan, they've liked your explanation of AI and would like to see more of that education happen in public. People basically want to arm themselves. I think this is basically, there's an epidemic, and they're looking for inoculation to protect themselves from this. And I think the more we can make this publicly available, the better. How to create a financially sustainable quality and use system. So education programs for Kid 99. So education, inoculation. I can tell you that we're going to take, although this was anonymous, we will be taking these results and we'll be cataloging them, and then we will be discussing them further.
Yeah, and
as
everything
have
we
these
do in
conversations.
the center, we will make it public. We can make these questions public. We'll see how they differ across the state, and it will certainly be a part of our conversations about what we can be doing. But again, please keep engaging, keep sending these questions via our other channels.
So I think we just wanted to express our gratitude to you. We recognize that this was a bit of an experiment this evening, but we really want to show that it's not just a bunch of obviously potentially progressive thought leaders from Seattle who are going around the country or the state talking about this, but that we engage with the public to hear what is truly pertinent and set the agenda appropriately. And this has been the first step towards doing that. And you're really helping us have this really powerful democratic discourse. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for being such good sports and supporting us with this. And thank you for the really important work that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Good job. Thanks.